Meghan is hardly innocent. She's down in the dirt with me, whether she likes it or not.
The order did not arrive with ceremony, applause, or warning. It arrived inside a sealed crimson folder placed directly before Prince William, carrying language powerful enough to end decades of royal protection in a single morning. Before noon, Prince Andrew had lost his palace rooms, ceremonial access, staff privileges, official transport, and every remaining entitlement connecting him to the working monarchy. This was not a temporary suspension. William had enforced the 1917 letters patent, and the palace doors were closing. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Buckingham Palace felt tense that morning. Household officials were summoned without explanation, their phones removed before the meeting. William entered with the directive beneath his arm, declined tea, and remained standing. The 1917 letters patent, a royal instrument defining who may hold princely status and privileges, now supplied the principle behind a harsher act. Andrew would lose every palace entitlement. William stated the decision plainly. His uncle would surrender royal accommodation rights, private office access, household staff, ceremonial entry, official vehicles, security courtesies, and attendance at restricted family events. These privileges mattered because they kept Andrew connected to royal power after his public role had ended. Removing them meant more than embarrassment. It severed the machinery that still treated him as protected. Andrew sat alone at Royal Lodge when the folder reached him. The Duke read the first page slowly, but the second changed his face. He set the document down, pushed back his chair, and demanded a conversation with William. Anger came first. Beneath it sat something colder. Fear that his family had decided he no longer belonged inside the institution that shaped his life. William felt that weight too. He told a trusted aide that the monarchy could not ask the public for loyalty while preserving privileges that damaged the crown. The crown, meaning the monarchy as an institution rather than merely its sovereign, could not survive one rule for the nation and another for royal blood. The order had already reached palace security. While Andrew was reading, access cards were disabled, vehicle clearances erased, and entrances closed. At the restricted North Gate, an officer watched his name disappear from the authorized list. Then another detail surfaced. A second sealed instruction carried Charles's initials, but not the king's full signature. Had the monarch approved the action, or merely refused to stop it? Andrew wanted that answer face to face. But before he could challenge the order, the palace had to confront a deeper truth. This was not only a constitutional decision. It was a family judgment, delivered by one generation against another. For William, the signature represented discipline. For Andrew, it represented betrayal. For Charles, it represented a family failure he had spent years trying to contain without destroying his brother. Behind the legal language were three men bound by blood but separated by duty, pride, and an increasingly dangerous silence. As the palace prepared for confrontation, each understood that the argument was no longer about rooms, vehicles, or ceremonies. It was about who still belonged inside the crown. William carried the burden of what came next. As the future king, the heir expected to inherit the throne, he believed royal privilege had to be earned through service, restraint, and responsibility. Without those limits, the monarchy's demand for public trust became hollow. Andrew saw the same privileges differently. Private entrances, family ceremonies, staff courtesies, and royal residences were not comforts to him. They were proof that birth still protected him. Charles sat alone in his study with Andrew's file open across his desk. The king, meaning the reigning sovereign, reached the final page but could not turn it. Childhood memories pressed against constitutional duty. He admitted quietly that his instinct as a brother had repeatedly collided with his obligation to protect the crown, and each delay had made the eventual reckoning harsher. William paused outside the door before entering. He steadied his breathing, unfolded a handwritten note, then slipped it back into his pocket. The prince chose his words carefully. Compassion, he told his father, could not become institutional paralysis. Charles looked away. The words wounded him, because they were true. Andrew refused to believe the order would survive a private appeal. During a recorded telephone conversation with a longtime associate, he insisted William had overreached, and predicted Charles would never allow an heir to humiliate his uncle before the world. Yet the directive reached far beyond visible ceremony. It barred him from contacting senior household staff for favors, using informal influence. or presenting himself as a confidential royal intermediary. Sarah Ferguson watched Andrew pace across the drawing room, gripping the folded order until its edge tore. She urged him to remain calm. The Duke stopped, turned, and answered that calmness was what had allowed William to move against him. That anger concealed a deeper fear. William's decision had not begun that morning. Weeks earlier, one private palace ceremony had exposed how far Andrew was still willing to push, and why no apology could ever fully repair what followed. The three men were now exposed, but the true cause remained hidden behind another palace door. To understand why William finally acted, the story must return to the private ceremony where Andrew crossed a line no apology could erase. The removal order began weeks earlier, during a private investiture rehearsal that was never intended to become part of royal history. Andrew had not been invited to participate. He had no ceremonial role, no official authorization, and no reason to enter the restricted gallery. Yet shortly before the rehearsal began, the Duke appeared through a private corridor, addressed staff as though he still commanded them, and demanded a place beside the king. William witnessed the intrusion, and something inside him finally changed. Charles had gathered only a small circle inside Buckingham Palace. The investiture rehearsal, a private practice for the ceremony in which the monarch formally gives honors, concerned future royal procedures and carried strict limits on attendance. William stood beside his father while senior courtiers and selected household staff reviewed each movement. The secrecy mattered, because these rehearsals shaped how authority would be presented during the next phase of the reign. Andrew entered as though no boundary applied to him. Old family permissions, personal relationships, and courtesies never formally withdrawn had left parts of his palace access active. Those openings allowed him to move closer to official royal business than his public position suggested. He crossed the gallery, ordered a junior equerry, an officer who assists members of the household, to place a chair beside Charles, and declared that the king's brother had every right to observe. William stepped forward and said the gathering was restricted to working royals. Andrew turned on him immediately. He spoke not to the heir, but to a younger nephew he expected to silence. The prince's jaw tightened, yet he held back for Charles's sake. Every member of staff understood the insult, and that silence made the humiliation sharper. Charles finally asked Andrew to withdraw. The king's voice was controlled but painfully subdued. His brother stared at him, pushed the chair backward, and accused the family of allowing public anger to decide who counted as royal. Then he left without apologizing. A security officer approached William moments later with a documented access report. Andrew had entered using an authorization code tied to an outdated household privilege that should have disappeared years earlier. The revelation changed everything. William ordered a complete audit. The review uncovered dormant but usable rights involving restricted entrances, internal transport, ceremonial guest approvals, and direct contact with senior staff. These were not harmless remnants. They were channels of influence hidden inside routine palace systems. William returned to the empty gallery after everyone had gone. He straightened the chair Andrew had moved, then faced the security chief. "Remove every exception," he said. "I want the full list." The hidden privileges were exposed. Now Andrew demanded a confrontation, and Charles agreed to witness it. The men would finally speak without courtiers, statements, or ceremony protecting them from one another. When Andrew entered the king's private sitting room, he did not bow, apologize, or wait to be invited to speak. He placed William's order on the table and accused his nephew of attempting to erase him from the family. Charles remained seated between them, visibly strained, while the prince stood beside the fireplace in complete silence. Then Andrew pointed directly at the future king and delivered the challenge everyone had feared. "You have no right to decide whether I belong here." Charles had insisted there would be no aides, secretaries, or legal advisors in the room. The private sitting room, a personal chamber used for family discussions away from official business, had become the last place where the three men could speak before the order became public. William carried the security audit and the formal schedule removing Andrew's privileges. His uncle brought only the directive, crushed at the edges from being folded again and again. Andrew accused William of hiding personal resentment behind constitutional language. He said the prince had always seen him as an embarrassment, never as an uncle, and claimed the order was designed to humiliate him before the future king took the throne. William did not raise his voice. He answered that the humiliation had not been created by one document. It had grown through years of expecting the palace to absorb every consequence, while Andrew kept the comforts of status. Andrew stepped toward him. Charles rose immediately and placed one hand on the table between them. The king ordered his brother to sit down. Andrew refused. William did not move back. The silence tightened until the prince opened the security file and read from the documented record. William revealed that Andrew had entered restricted palace areas 3 times after being told not to take part in official operations. The investiture rehearsal was not an isolated intrusion. The audit showed a pattern, and that pattern mattered, because every unauthorized entrance weakened the boundary between private family access and royal authority. Charles removed his glasses and pressed his fingers against his eyes. He admitted that he knew some informal privileges remained, but he had considered them harmless courtesies. William answered that every unregulated courtesy could become a constitutional liability, meaning a private exception capable of damaging the monarchy's public duty. Andrew turned toward Charles. His anger gave way to one final demand. "Do you support this?" The king paused, then looked directly at his brother. "I will not overturn it." Andrew's face changed. For one brief second, fury vanished, and grief took its place. The family appeal was over. Beyond the closed door, palace lawyers were preparing to explain why William's decision could not be undone by emotion. The 1917 letters patent had been created during an age of war, suspicion, and national uncertainty. But William now used its central principle for a modern royal reckoning. Titles and privileges exist only within boundaries defined by the crown. The prince was not attempting to rewrite Andrew's birth. He was separating blood from function, family identity from palace authority. Yet the legal strategy carried a personal danger. By enforcing it so forcefully, William was also defining the standards by which he would one day be judged. William entered the narrow palace library carrying the final legal file. The letters patent, a formal order issued by the sovereign to define royal status and authority, offered the principle behind the move. But the decision would be enforced through household rules, security systems, residence arrangements, and ceremonial controls. Charles had refused to overturn the order, giving his son delegated authority to act. The senior legal advisor warned William that every sentence would be read as a declaration about the future monarchy. The prince closed the file slowly and answered that this was exactly why the language could not bend. Royal styles, household privileges, ceremonial access, and institutional recognition existed only while they served the crown rather than damaged it. Charles still searched for mercy. The king asked whether one private entrance and a reduced staff arrangement could remain as a gesture of family dignity. William answered without anger. Exceptions, he said, had created the crisis. A private kindness could not continue wearing the uniform of public authority. The legal team then uncovered the true scale of the problem. Andrew's remaining privileges were scattered across security, transport, residences, finance, ceremonies, and private secretariats. No single document contained them all. Removing him required 6 coordinated orders, each closing a different path back into palace influence. One discovery carried greater danger. Andrew still qualified for restricted family planning meetings concerning royal estates. Those meetings, private discussions about property, funding, and future use, gave him access to decisions far beyond ceremony. William ordered his name removed immediately. A secretary placed 6 documents before him. William signed each one separately, setting down the pen between signatures as if measuring the human cost, and closing one privilege he had assumed permanent. Camilla watched Charles when the papers returned. The queen consort saw his hand hover over Andrew's file, but she remained silent. She understood that any attempt to soften the decision could reopen the conflict with William. The signatures established control on paper. Soon, Andrew would learn what they meant in practice. Legal authority had spoken in ink, but its cruelty would be felt in corridors where recognition vanished one privilege at a time. The first consequence came before Andrew had fully accepted the decision. His driver informed him that the palace vehicle assigned for a private family engagement had been withdrawn. Minutes later, a household administrator called to confirm that his office telephone access would end by evening. Then came the moment that transformed legal language into personal humiliation. At the entrance he had used for decades, his security pass flashed red, and the guard stepped forward to deny him entry. Andrew arrived at Buckingham Palace expecting to collect personal belongings from his former office. His palace identification had already been deactivated. Private office support had ended. Official transport was cancelled. and every request now had to pass through a limited family liaison, a single contact allowed to handle personal matters without restoring royal authority. He could still attend private gatherings when Charles invited him, but he no longer possessed automatic entry, ceremonial precedence, or independent access to royal buildings. Andrew pressed the card against the reader again. The panel flashed red a second time. He stared at it, then told the guard there had been a mistake. The officer had known him for years, yet he could only apologize and explain that an escort was required. Staff members passed behind the barrier without meeting the Duke's eyes, and his face reddened as the meaning settled in. Sarah found him silent when he returned to Royal Lodge. He placed the inactive pass on the mantelpiece instead of throwing it down. She watched him for several seconds before asking what had happened. Andrew looked at her and asked whether his family now considered him a stranger. The losses kept coming. Several longtime employees accepted reassignment rather than remain inside a privately funded household with an uncertain future. A supervised removal team entered his old office and began cataloging correspondence, photographs, and ceremonial objects. Inside one locked drawer, they found private letters exchanged between Andrew and Charles, raising a question over which memories belonged to the family and which belonged to the crown. Charles received one returned photograph later that afternoon. The king ran his thumb across the frame, then ordered that it be sent privately to his brother rather than placed in the royal archive. His gesture preserved affection, but it could not restore power. William heard about the rejected pass from an aide and closed his eyes. The prince had expected resistance, yet the thought of his uncle standing outside a familiar entrance struck harder than he admitted. With every official channel severed, only one conversation remained. Not between an heir and a disgraced duke, but between a nephew and the uncle he had chosen to cast out. There were no lawyers in the room, no crimson folders, no security officers waiting outside the door. William and Andrew met alone at Windsor, seated across from one another at a small table meant for private family conversations. For the first time since the order was issued, neither man could appeal to Charles, palace procedure, or constitutional language. Andrew looked exhausted rather than furious. William appeared composed, but his hands remained locked together. What followed was not another battle. It was the truth neither had wanted to say. William had requested the meeting after learning how sharply the restrictions had been enforced. The prince did not intend to reverse the decision, but he wanted his uncle to hear why it had become unavoidable. Windsor, one of the monarch's principal royal residences, offered privacy without the machinery of Buckingham Palace surrounding them. That mattered because neither man could hide behind staff, protocol, or prepared statements. Andrew arrived without papers. He still believed a private appeal might restore ceremonial access and family accommodation privileges, but his empty hands exposed a deeper need. The Duke told William that the palace had been the one place where he believed blood could never be revoked. Losing public duties had wounded his pride. Losing the pass, he admitted, made him feel erased from his own family. William listened without interrupting. He said Andrew was not being removed from the family, but the institution could no longer protect his sense of belonging. Royal access, meaning the formal right to enter, participate, or command within palace life, was not the same as affection. The prince insisted that love could remain even when authority ended. Andrew then asked whether Charles had truly supported the action. William refused to hide behind the king. He said the decision was his responsibility, although his father had allowed it to stand. Leadership, he added, sometimes meant accepting personal hatred to prevent greater harm to the crown. Andrew slid the inactive pass across the table. William looked at it but did not pick it up. Silence settled between them. After several seconds, the Duke withdrew his hand and returned the card to his pocket. Something changed. Andrew stopped demanding restoration. He asked whether he could still attend private family occasions as Charles's brother. William answered yes, but only as a guest, never again as royal authority. Andrew rose and said William had become more like the crown than the nephew he remembered. The prince replied that he wished those roles had never been forced apart. Their meeting ended without forgiveness, but beyond Windsor, the nation was preparing its verdict. Was he protecting monarchy or crossing a line beyond repair? By sunrise, the private order had become the most explosive royal story in Britain. Television networks abandoned their scheduled segments. Commentators gathered outside palace gates, and newspaper presses ran late editions carrying the same unmistakable message. Andrew's royal protection was over. Some called William decisive. Others called the punishment merciless. Yet one front page captured the national mood more powerfully than any speech. A photograph of the palace entrance beneath 3 words printed in black. The door closes. Buckingham Palace released a short statement before breakfast. The royal household, meaning the officials and departments that support the sovereign and working family, confirmed that Andrew no longer held operational, residential, ceremonial, or administrative privileges. The statement drew a hard line between private family ties and official royal status. That distinction mattered because affection could remain, but access, authority, and public standing could not survive without service. London reacted at once. A major newspaper filled its front page with Buckingham Palace's closed iron gates, placed Andrew's smaller portrait in one corner, and stamped "The door closes" across the page. Outside the palace, crowds gathered behind barriers while broadcasters delivered live reports. One woman raised a handwritten sign reading, "Privilege must mean service." Another told a reporter that no family humiliation should become public entertainment. William watched the coverage from a private office with the sound muted. The prince remained still until the newspaper image appeared on screen. Then he looked away. He had acted to protect the monarchy, yet the country had turned a painful family judgment into a spectacle. Victory felt colder than he expected. Charles felt that cruelty more sharply. The king told Camilla that the institution might have been protected, but Andrew had been reduced to a symbol of disgrace. The queen consort listened, then reminded him that silence would have created a deeper wound. William had acted only after delay made every remaining option harsher. Commentators soon focused on the precedent. Royal privilege was no longer permanent when separated from duty. The decision began to look less like punishment and more like a blueprint for William's future reign. Senior courtiers, initially fearful of constitutional turmoil, rallied behind the order as public approval grew. Their support mattered because palace unity would determine whether the order looked like one prince's personal campaign or a settled royal standard that every future member of the family would be forced to obey. Accountability had strengthened the palace, but one judgment still remained. The country had spoken through headlines and crowds. Now Charles had to decide whether to stand beside his heir or retreat toward his brother, not as a reluctant sibling, but as guardian of the crown William would inherit. The final decision was not announced from a balcony or delivered beneath cameras. It came in the king's study, where Charles placed Andrew's file beside William's directive and closed both covers. For years, the monarchy had tried to preserve family unity by allowing uncertainty to survive. That uncertainty was over. Andrew would remain the king's brother, but he would never again exercise palace privilege, ceremonial authority, or institutional influence. Blood remained. Protection did not. The crown had chosen duty. Charles signed the confirmation without ceremony. The king ordered each department to treat William's directive as permanent, meaning Andrew's privileges could not be restored or revived through exceptions. He could attend family gatherings when invited, but he would hold no automatic access, official standing, staff entitlement, or ceremonial role. William remained beside the desk as his father spoke. The prince explained that he had not acted to punish his uncle. He had acted to end a system in which affection repeatedly overruled institutional responsibility. Charles listened, then admitted that fear had delayed him. He had worried that firmness would look like abandonment. Instead, his hesitation had transferred the burden to his son. Charles finally looked at William and said, "You did what I could not." Andrew received the confirmation at Royal Lodge. He read it once, folded it carefully, and made no protest. The Duke removed the palace pass from his pocket, placed it inside a desk drawer, and closed it. That movement ended the royal life he had assumed would never leave him. Sarah sat beside him without offering false comfort. She told Andrew that he now had to discover who he was without palace doors opening automatically. He answered that those doors had never felt like privilege. They had felt like identity. The decision did not erase Andrew from the family. Charles remained his brother, and William remained his nephew, but neither bond carried automatic royal power anymore. The 1917 letters patent, a formal royal order defining status and authority, now stood for a harder principle. Privilege could not survive without service, accountability, and boundaries. William left the study after the conversation. Charles watched him cross the courtyard below, no longer seeing only his son, but a future sovereign defining his reign. Andrew lost the illusion of authority. Charles surrendered the hope that family loyalty could solve every crisis. William accepted the loneliness of command. The palace doors closed on Andrew, but they opened a new chapter for the crown, defined by the uncompromising truth that no royal stands above duty. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.